welcome, Martin, and thanks for giving of your time. And I thought perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about how you first got into jazz and why the guitar.
Well, my father, his name is Buck Taylor, and he was a jazz bass player. And interestingly, he didn't start playing music until he was 30. So let's think. 2 years after he started playing, I started to play. So yeah, 2 or 3 years after that. So he started out playing a guitar, and I can remember the very day that the guitar arrived. There was a catalog called Bell's Catalog, and you could buy all kinds of musical instruments from that. And he bought he got up the Hofner President, which is actually sit here. It's that guitar here. There's my dad's. There's my dad up there on the picture as well, and an amplifier, a little Watkins amplifier. And I can remember the day these packages arrived, because things like that didn't arrive at our house, you know. And I can remember my dad opening the guitar case, and I can remember the first thing I remember is the smell of this brand new guitar, this beautiful smell of wood and glue. And I've always got a thing, like a lot of guitar players love the smell of a guitar. They all have their own thing. That was the first thing that got me. Wow! And I looked at it, and it was just shiny and it's beautiful. And I'd already listened a lot to. I'd already heard a lot of music, because my dad, he was always playing music, and he especially the Hot Club of France, Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli. And then, of course, Eddie Lang and Joe Venuti, and Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald. So the house was full of music. So I kind of knew. My dad got the guitar up, and he started to play it, and he'd figured out a few chords. Then shortly after that, I broke my leg on a swing park, and I was off school for a few weeks, and with my leg in a cast, and I was in the sofa, just sitting on the sofa. There, of course, there was no daytime television or anything in those days. It was really boring. And I said, one day I said to my mum, can I play Dad's guitar? And she said, oh, I don't know about that. And then let me think about it. And she came back, she said, okay, you can play it, but don't tell him. Because you might not be supposed to play it, you know, because it's kind of his pride and joy. So she gave me this kind of this guitar was just kind of laying over me, kind of like this, you know, just with my leg up in a cast, and just my mum had the radio on. There was a BBC radio program called Housewife's Choice. Politically correct now, but Housewife's Choice. It was the idea that was women were home doing all the housework and everything, and it was music, and it was all songs. It used to be like Max Bygraves and all these songs that were very popular at the time. And so I just started playing along to them, and I found where the notes were, and I found I could play the melodies. You know, so first of all, one finger, then I figured out you could go from one string to another. And then my mum kind of owned up to him after a few weeks. She said, you know, he's been playing that guitar. It sounds quite good. You know, he's been able to pick out the melodies, and I was singing along to it. And my dad said, oh, go on, play for me. And I played something. He said, oh, that's good. So he started putting the Django records on. And I can remember, I think the first one was, wasn't Sweet Georgia, it could have been Sweet Georgia Brown, I think it was. And he showed me the melody, showed me how to play it, and he showed me where the positions were on the guitar. He said, so you can play that. Well, with Sweet Georgia Brown, you've got this kind of thing, it kind of repeats itself. Then he said, go down two, same thing. And then he showed me the chords, and for some reason, I just understood it. Right from the very beginning, I just understood music, and it made sense. A lot of other things, when I went to school, we did mathematics and all kinds of subjects. I didn't know what on earth they were talking about. So playing the guitar and music, which I just got it for some reason. What it did, because I've often been asked, did guitar start out as a hobby? And it was never a hobby, because it was actually how I interpreted life from a very early age. I probably now, I would have been in these days we live in now, I'd have been tested and found to be on an autism spectrum, probably. I have actually taken a test which does kind of confirm that, but I think a lot of musicians are, a lot of people that have that kind of mind turn to music, mathematics, all kinds of things, and it's just being able to channel it. So whenever when I was at school and any subjects that I was learning, if I could relate it to music, then I could understand it. So everything that I learned through through music, because for whatever reason it just clicked immediately. And then of course I couldn't understand why other people didn't know it. I remember talking to some kids one day in school, and I said, when you hear a song going on in your head, but you decide you want to change the melody a little bit, and they looked at me, no. I said, well, don't you have music going on yet? No. But I had this music going on all the time, which could be very annoying, actually, at times, very, very distracting. But that was really how that came about. Once I started to play, I remember one day my dad showing me something and I really got it. And then he was playing a record of Django, I'll see you in, I'll see you in my dreams. It's a wonderful guitar, wonderful solo he plays on that, because it's just melodic. He just takes the melody and they just takes you on this journey, this storytelling of melodic improvisation, one idea going to another. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I remember sitting there with my dad, and Dad said, that's fantastic, isn't it? He said, what do you see what he's doing there? He played the melody, but now he's improvising. So I said, well, what's improvising? He said, and because my dad wasn't a schooled musician himself, he couldn't read or write music, and he hadn't studied it. He just picked it up as he went along with some of his friends. So I said, what is improvisation? And he just said to me, well, it's like you've got the same chords, but you just make up a different melody on the top, on the spur of the moment, in the moment. I get that. I know. And that's actually how I teach improvisation. I don't even use the word improvisation. I say to my students, variation. Let's take a melody, now vary it. Now you know the chords, and don't worry about what the scales are right now. You don't need to know all that theory. Just play that melody, and then we'll start taking it from there. And once you've done that, you're in the paddling pool. You're just paddling along. You're not out of your depth yet. When you want to get a little bit further out, you can get further out, and you need to know what you're doing. You need to know how to swim. So then you need to get some of the theory stuff together. But basically, that's how I always teach it. And because of that, it was just, I was off. That was it. And I just had this aptitude, and the reason it was the guitar was because my dad happened to get a guitar. It could have been another instrument, I think, but I'm glad it was. Although at the time I did think of it would be good to play another instrument, because everyone was playing the guitar, in the 60s, in the late 50s, 60s. My next door neighbor was a bit older than me. His name was his real name was John Cawthra, but he changed his name, professional name. He became Jippy Mayo. He was the guitar player in Dr. Feelgood. He wrote a big hit. He wrote Milk and Alcohol was one of the big hits for Dr. Feelgood, and he was my next door neighbor, and so we started playing at the same time. And he was great because he was that little bit older than me. He got a better grip of it than me. He would figure things out a lot quicker than I did. I wasn't very quick, but I kind of delved deep when I wanted to learn something. So there was him and the other kids that played, and then I found really my dad had some friends that played. There were local guys that used to play in a local. Well, it was a kind of a music shop. It was actually they sold sewing machines and haberdashery and knitting needles and things. But the guy was he didn't play music, but he loved music and he loved musicians. So he started getting in guitars and trumpets, saxophones, pianos, all kinds of things, drum kits, and for local musicians to buy to go there, so they didn't have to go all the way up to London, which was a bit of a journey. And what it did, one of the reasons he did it was all the musicians used to turn up there on a Saturday. They used to show up, and Jippy told me, he said, let's go up to this this shop. He said they'll let you play the guitars. So we went in, and I was 8 years old, but I've been playing guitar for about 4 years. I was 8 years old. I think I was always playing in the woods and in the river and everything, and I was covered in mud. And I said, he said, Jippy said, he can play the guitar really well, and can he play one of the guitars? And the woman said to me, if you go back and have a wash, you can come back. He said, but you're not going to play a guitar like that. So I had to go back and have a wash, go back again, put another shirt on, and she let me play the guitar. And then she rang her partner, Alan, who ran the place, and she said, get here quick, there's a little boy in the shop that can play the guitar. So he came over. The next thing I know, somebody from the local newspaper had come round, and I had to go round to the sort of the offices of the local newspaper with a guitar that I borrowed, had my photograph taken, and they interviewed me, and I was in the local paper. And then I used to play every Saturday afternoon in the shop window, and it used to attract huge crowds until they stopped it. The police actually stopped it because there was too. I don't think I've ever had audiences as big as that since. An 8-year-old boy playing guitar in a shop window, and I used to plug into an amp, and then with a long lead, and then the amp would be outside the shop in the street, and I would just sit along and play. It must have sounded awful, but and then some of the other players used to come along, and there was some of my dad's friends who played really well. There was a bunch of West Indian guys of my dad's age that used to play saxophones and all kinds of instruments, and so we used to play jazz. It was always jazz right from the beginning, but then there was always a bit of reggae and calypso used to go in there as well.
And where were you living in those days, Martin?
We lived in a town called Harlow, which is probably, I don't know how many miles it is, a long time since I was last there. I think it's probably about 35, 40 miles northeast of London. It's a new town, just like in Scotland, Cumbernauld and East Kilbride, all those towns built after the war. And my parents moved there because they were homeless, and because of the Blitz, and there was nowhere to live. My parents came from South London. Although my grandmother was Scottish, that's my kind of family connection with Scotland, and so they moved out there. So everybody there was from somewhere else. That's why when I left there when I was 15, I've been back a couple of times to play at the local theatre, but it's not the place that I feel. I have childhood memories there when I've gone there. I remember thinking, oh yeah, I remember this and remember that. But I know I know a lot of American cities better than I know there. I've actually spent more time in America than I ever spent living in that town. But it was just my childhood days. I left school when I was 15 and really went on the road from then. But what was good, my dad got really good on the double bass, and he played in a lot of traditional jazz bands. And he used to play a lot at the 100 Club in London, and with very, very good musicians. There was a great band based in that area. Well, it's actually a Scottish band leader, Alex Welsh, who was very, very, very famous at the time. And we used to go and see them, and I used to sit in with the band. And actually, when I was in my teens, I actually did a bunch of gigs for them with them, because their guitar player, Jim Douglas, who was also from Scotland, he went on a holiday, and they had some gigs coming, so I went and did them. And I think I was probably about 16 or something. Then when the drummer of that band, of Alex Welsh's band, left, this guy called he was very, very well known in those days, Lenny Hastings. He was quite a character. He was the guy that used to do the drum solo and go ooh-yah, ooh-yah. And that was his kind of his his trademark. He left the band and he formed his own group. And he knew my dad, and he said, "Do you think your boy would like to play guitar in my band?" I was only 14. I was still at school. And so my dad said, "Yeah, okay." My mum wasn't all that keen, me going out and playing with all these musicians that drank and smoked and everything. But I used to go out and play play in that band. That was really the start. I mean, I'd already played in bands before. I played in my dad had a band that used to play at weddings and village dances, you know, where you turn up at a village hall that was a wooden shed with corrugated roof. And sometimes there wouldn't be electricity, so I'd have to play a banjo, you know, because it was louder. So yeah, I started playing really young. From 8 years old was when I first played at the music shop, and I did a few gigs then. By the time I was 11, I was working in my dad's band, and at 14 I was playing in Lenny's band. 15 I left school, and then I really kind of went out on the road.
And where did that road take you, Martin?
Well, initially, it took me to Morecambe in Lancashire, seaside town. I joined the band. Again, another musician from Scotland, Harry Bents. He came from Wishaw. There was Harry Bents and Jimmy Bents, and they were both fantastic musicians. Harry in particular was like a virtuoso alto player and clarinet player, you know, played like Artie Shaw. But he played he had a band on the QE2, and he used to do that in the winter with the band for 6 months during the winter. And in the summer, he used to play at Pontin's holiday camp in Morecambe, which I wasn't that keen on going. But when I went there, I just thought, I just want to be a musician. I just want to play. So I got the gig, and I was getting £38 a week. I think my dad was only earning about 22, 23 pound a week or something. I was getting £38 a week, and I couldn't really even really spend it. I just stayed on the camp as well. So I was playing every night. I was getting paid, and this was great. And then at the end of that, then we went on the QE2, and so when I was 16 by that time, and at the age of 16, I went to New York and spent the winter based in New York, and then going around the Caribbean. We did Atlantic crossings, because QE2, like the Queen Mary now, they're not cruise ships, but they did. They were ocean liners. They did going backwards and forwards, or going out to Australia. But they'd started at that time doing Caribbean cruises, because at the same time Concorde came about, supersonic airline, and Concorde did a deal where people could go. You could go backwards and forwards. You go one way on Concorde, another way on the QE2. It's like a really luxurious thing, and it cost something unbelievable, like £1,000. But because of that, because then people were starting to fly across the Atlantic more, rather than going by. At one time, only the very, very wealthy could fly across the Atlantic. Everyone else went by ship. But people were starting to fly more. So then the ocean liners like the QE2 had to adapt and actually start doing cruises. So I spent a winter, the winter of 73, 74, based in New York, around the Caribbean. And I was 16, 17. It was wonderful, absolutely amazing. And then we came back, and then we went back to the holiday camp again for the summer, and I did that, and that's actually where I met my wife Liz, who's from Glasgow, and then that's one of the reasons why we ended up coming to Scotland. So that kind of took me up to about the age of 18. I'd already done quite a lot. I did some other things on ships then, and I was doing radio broadcasts and things. So really, by the time I was 18, certainly before I was 20 years of age, I was already quite a veteran. I started very, very, very young.
And so what was the sort of big break, if you like? Because obviously you're hugely famous now, and have been for a
Well,
very well, you are.
infamous.
Well, I don't know about that part, but you know, I mean, obviously your career trajectory must have taken a, you know, what was the sort of what was the galvanizing moment that
Yeah, I can trace it back. I can trace it back to, well, I told you my dad used to play at the 100 Club in London, very famous, one of the oldest, I believe it's the oldest jazz club in the world. And it's still there. It's where the Sex Pistols later on, that's where they all started. The Rolling Stones used to play down there. And so I used to go there a lot with my dad. And I knew the guy that owned it, Roger Horton. And I was playing, actually, I wasn't booked for the gig. My dad was playing down there. And as he would often say to me, you know, I've got a gig at the 100 Club. Do you want to come? And I'd put the guitar and the amp in the car, and I'd go down there and I'd play a few tunes. But Roger said, we were talking to Roger after, and Roger said, oh, you'll be interested in next week. He said, we've got Barney Kessel playing here. I thought, what? You know, incredible, because I've been listening to his records. I couldn't believe Barney Kessel was there. And he said, yeah, what do you want to come down and listen to Barney play? I said, yeah, wow, I'd be in the same room as Barney Kessel. Just amazing. And then the drummer who was playing that night, he said, I'm putting a band in for the support that night. He said, why don't you play in the band with us and support Barney Kessel? So I thought, wow, yeah, okay. Now, by this time, I would have been, I'd come back from America. I would have been 19, I think. Yes, something like that. And I'd gone back to the area with Liz to see my dad. And I'd got some gigs in London, so I was in that area at that time. So I did the gig, and I met Barney, and loads of people were there, and a lot of guitar players. And so I got to know Barney. That was the first time I knew him. And later on, he became a really good friend, and we worked together a lot. And he became not just one of my big guitar heroes and influences, but became a very, very good friend, real dear friend, which amazed me. I thought, you know, I'm looking over there. I've got my vinyl collection over there, and I've got a whole section of Barney, and I just listen to those. And at the end of the evening, he said, I like your playing. He said, you like Charlie Christian, don't you? I said, yeah, I love Charlie Christian. And you, because of course Charlie Christian was his hero. So me meeting him was like him meeting Charlie Christian, which he did, because they actually came from the same town. But then somebody was in that audience that really changed my guitar life, a gentleman called Ike Isaacs. And actually, if you look behind me there, that's Ike's guitar, and there's a picture of Ike up there. So my dad was really my first influence, and then Ike came along, and he was such a lovely guy. I used to listen to him on the radio when I was a kid. He used to have a program called Guitar Club, and when I was very, very young. And at that time, he was playing guitar with Stefan Grappelli. But he came down to see me. Oh, Herb Ellis was in the audience as well. So no pressure. So when I finished, Ike came up to me, and he was such a lovely guy, and he said, oh, he came from Burma, and he had this wonderful accent. He said, oh, I love your playing, man. I love your playing. Beautiful, really, really nice. Why don't you come over to the house? He said, well, I'll make you a curry, and we'll play. We'll play a few things. So he lived in Wembley. So I went over to his house, and we sat down, and my ears and eyes were opened, because I remember him saying to me, what is it you really want to do on the guitar? Because by this time I was doing gigs. I'd gone back briefly to London, because that's where there was work there for me. And I was playing at the Dorchester Hotel, the Ritz Hotel, the Café de Paris, doing kind of commercial gigs. I wasn't really playing the music that I wanted, but maybe sometimes during the week I'd get some jazz gigs that are more interesting. And I said, well, I've always really been fascinated by the guitar as a solo instrument, because I went to see Segovia play, and I thought I'd love to be able to do it, just be on stage with the guitar and just play. But I don't want to play classical music. I want to play jazz. You know, if I could do that, but sound like Bill Evans, then wow, or something. You know, that would be my dream. So Ike, what he did was he played me some recordings of a guitar players like George Van Epps, great 7-string guitar player, Lenny Breau, all that played fingerstyle. I didn't play fingerstyle at that time. I just played with a pick. And then Ike played a little bit. I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And then he said to me, play me something. So I sat down with the guitar. I thought, all right, I'll play. He said, play me something solo. I said, well, I don't really play many things solo, but I kind of figured out chord melody at that time, which is a kind of a start. There's a lot more to it than that. But so I just played this little chord melody thing of Here's That Rainy Day. I went through it a couple of times, and then when I finished playing, I thought, "Oh, that was quite good." And he looked at me and he said, "That's really boring." I thought, "Oh, okay." Well, so I said, "Well, what would you do then?" Because that's just really a very straightforward chord melody solo. And he said, "Well, you want to make it a bit more interesting, get things going on." He said something like this. Lines go, what are you doing? That's just quite amazing. And he said he tried to show me a few things, and it was just kind of beyond me. I just couldn't really grasp it. I remember leaving his house and actually being dizzy. Before I drove off in the car, I had to kind of sit there for a while and just get my equilibrium again, because just all this stuff he played was just quite amazing. Then I did a gig. I was playing at a, well, I can only describe it as a clip joint. It was a place it was a club in the West End of London that was a little bit dubious, shall we say. And but I played there for a week with a guitar player that I knew. We were actually filling in for the regular band that were there. So it was just me and this guitar player who sang. Well, one night, a group of guys came in, and they were very much part of that Soho crowd. This was in Soho, so the guy came up to me afterwards and he said, "Oh, I really like your playing." He said, "My name's Peter Boiseau," which didn't mean anything to me. He said, "I've got a number of pizza restaurants called the Pizza Express." So Peter Boiseau was the guy that started Pizza Express, which is now a huge chain. But he started the very first one just around the corner from the club where I was playing in Wardour Street. It's still there. That was the very first pizza restaurant. And I got talking to him, well, why did you open a pizza restaurant? And he said, well, because he said, very unusual in the 60s. He said, I was vegetarian. And I said, well, I'm a vegetarian as well. So we got talking about pizzas. And he said, look, why don't you come down to my club in Dean Street? And it's still there, the famous jazz club. He said, come and I've got the Pizza Express All-Stars, who I knew all the guys in that band. Actually, Lenny Hastings was in it. And he said, come down and have a play. So I went down and I had a play. But they didn't want a guitar player. They didn't want guitar in the band. They wanted to keep it just piano, bass, drums. But then Peter said to me, he said, I've got another venue I've just opened. It was the old Lions Tea House on, not Hyde Park Corner, the next one, the next one down. Anyway, in Knightsbridge. He said, and I'm going to call it Pizza on the Park. He said, but I've got a really good room downstairs, but he said, I thought a nice guitar duo would go really well upstairs. He said, nobody will be listening to you. He said, but because it's noisy. but it's for me. I'd like to do it, and then I'm going to open the downstairs, and I'd like you to play there. So I thought, great. Now who can I get to play? And I just talking to Ike, and Ike had just left Stefan Grappelli at that time. And Ike is one of my guitar heroes. So he's asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I met the guy Peter Boiso. He's wants me to do a guitar duo thing with every Thursday night at the Pizza on the Park." I said, "Do you know anyone that you think might like to do it with me?" And he says, "I'll do it." And I was like, "What? You could do that? Come and play." You know, he's just been touring all over the world with Stefan Grappelli. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'd like." So it gave me a lot of confidence, because I suddenly thought, he must think I'm good enough to play with him. So he said, "Yeah, we'll do it." He said, "The only thing is," he said, he liked everything worked out, because he wasn't a full-on improvising jazz musician. He knew incredible knowledge of harmony. So he said, the only thing is, he said, we've got to come up with arrangements. So if you come over to the house, a couple of times a week or something, we'll work on things. So I used to go around there, and basically he told me what to play. And I didn't know why I was playing them. It didn't fit, but I just did put my fingers where he told me to, and it sounded great. And he said, "Then you improvise here, and then we do that." And when he accompanied, he was a far stronger accompanist than I was. So I realized I had to get stronger at that. So it just always pushed me. And every Thursday night we used to play together, and my playing just kind of went up and up and up and up. And then the jigsaw puzzle started all coming together, and I started to understand what he was doing. I started to understand polyphonic guitar playing, as opposed to the simpler chord melody style, and started to hear a lot of those things as well. But also around about the same time, I started working with a piano player called Tony Lee. The Tony Lee Trio were resident at the Bull's Head at Barnes, which was and still is. I think it's still there. Very, very famous jazz club. Not the most salubrious place in the world, but you had to be good to play there. So he said, "Would you like to do some gigs with me at the Bull's Head?" I thought, wow, get to play at the Bull's Head. So what this did, it didn't intimidate me. It made I just thought, well, they must have faith in me. They must think I'm up to it. So I started playing there with him, with Tony, and it was the first time we played together. Was actually a great trombone player from Scotland who was very famous. He was really a household name. Was George Chisholm. And George Chisholm, I worked with him quite a few times. George Chisholm worked with Django, and I remember saying to Stefan Grappelli, because I knew that Louis Armstrong was Django's favorite jazz musician. He said there was another guy that Django was mad about. He said you'll never have heard of him. He was a trombone player from Scotland called George Chisholm. I said, I knew him. I worked with him. He was absolutely amazing. But he also used to do a lot of TV shows, and he had a comedy routine, so everybody knew him. So yeah, so I started playing there. Started playing with Tony Lee Trio, and then sometimes there'd be saxophone players in there. So like Art Thiemann, Don Weller, Dick Morrissey used to play with a lot. Sometimes with American musicians that were there. So that started happening as well. And then I started doing quite a lot of radio broadcasts as well. But when I was at one evening at the Bull's Head in Barnes, there was a bass player that sometimes used to do the gig. I'm trying to remember his name now. His name will come to me in a moment. But anyway, Phil Bates. That was his name, Phil Bates. And he used to play with Tubby Hayes and Ronnie Scott. By this time, I'd played at Ronnie Scott's a few times, got to know Ronnie. And what happened next was Phil came along and he said, I could left Stefan Grappelli's group. And at that point, it was the Diz Disley Trio, Stefan Grappelli with the Diz Disley Trio. Diz was a Django devotee guitar player that really got Stefan back out on the road again. And Phil was playing in the band, and Phil said to me, he said, we've got some gigs in France and Germany. By this time, John Etheridge had taken Ike's place. And he said, we got some gigs in France and Germany. This is 1979 now, to give you an idea at the time. We got gigs in France and Germany, a couple of TV shows, France and Belgium, a couple of TV shows. Would you like to do it? Diz can't do it. So would you come and take Diz's place? It would be you, me, John Etheridge, and Stefan. So yeah, great, fantastic. So I had the first gig, and Stefan had a very eccentric manager in France. He was a lovely guy, but he wasn't very well organized. Well, he's an agent. And Stefan used to say, Michel's my agent and I'm his manager. Because he was really quite disorganized. But Michel told me I had to go to Nantes. So I went to Nantes, which is in sort of northwest. In fact, many years later, I lived near there for a few years. So I went to Nantes, couldn't find the gig. And then I discovered that the gig was actually in Mantes, which is just outside Paris, like a suburb of Paris. So I'd gone to I was in the wrong part of the country. The first ever gig was Stefan Grappelli, so I missed it. So I thought, well, that's it, I'm fired. And so I thought, it would have been nice to have told my grandchildren that I once worked with Stefan Grappelli. But that's the end of that. But the next night, we were in, the next gig was in Deauville. So got to Deauville, and I thought, oh, he's going to be, because I had actually met Stefan before this. I knew him, but not very well. I thought, oh, he's not going to be very happy with me. So it wasn't like the first time I'd met him. But he said, I thought, oh, here we go. I was ready to get a really hard time. Because a lot of those old guys, that era, they were tough. And they really gave you a hard time. You know, nowadays, obviously, they wouldn't be allowed to be like harassment in the workplace or something. But, you know, they could be really tough with you. Hey, kid, all this sort of thing. But when I saw him, he said, oh, don't worry, Martin, don't worry. It's Michel. He always make a mistake. And so although I'd met Stefan before, he'd never heard me play. So we sat down backstage and we played. And he said, do you know such and such? And all these tunes, because I would have been 22, coming up for 23 now. So I looked a lot younger than in those days. I looked about 16. I was skinny and so he heard me play and he said, you know this? Oh, and he big smile on his face. He said, you know this? And he started playing a tune and I knew it. He said, how do you know these tunes? You're just a young kid. This isn't your generation of music. I grew up with it. Listening to you and Django and Louis Armstrong, and I just know this music. My dad's a jazz musician. Oh, this is great. So he thought this was fantastic. Anyway, this didn't come back because they'd had some kind of fallout. So Stefan said to me, I've got a tour of America in 3 months' time. Would you like to come? I said, yeah, great. I'd love to. So at the end of 1979, we went to the US and Canada and did some dates. It was a short trip. It was only about 4 weeks, I seem to remember. And at the end of that, he said, oh, I've got a UK tour. Would you like to do that? I said, yes, I did that. And then after that, oh, we've got another trip in America for 2 months, big tour. So I did that. So this went on for 11 years. And to this day, I still don't know if I was in the band. It was always like that. Are you free for this? And sometimes I didn't go. Sometimes it was somebody else. Then some gigs in France. But mostly I worked with Stefan in America and the UK. And then shortly after I started to play with Stefan, he met another guitar player a little bit older than me in France called Marc Fossé, a left-handed guitar player. And then Mark and I played together. Diz came back very, very briefly. And then they still had, him and Stefan still had another little fallout, and he didn't come back again. And Mark came, and it was Mark and I at that point as two guitars. Then we had a tour of the States and a tour of Brazil. And it was going to be two months in America and 2 months in Brazil. And I said, well, I don't want to go away for 4 months. You know, I had a family, because I mean, I got married when I was 19. Had you know, my son was born when I was 20. So all this time, you know, I had a family. I said, well, I can't go away for 4 months. So even 2 months is kind of too long. So Mark, Stefan and I were talking, and Mark was desperate to go to Brazil, but didn't really like working in the States. So I wanted to go to Brazil, but as well. But you know, I've been working a lot in the States anyway by that time, so I knew so many people, and it was really familiar for me. So Mark said, why don't we do this? He said, why don't you go to the States and I go to Brazil? So from that point on, so Stefan agreed to that. And from that point on, it really became a one guitar gig. And it became a kind of a lighter kind of sound. And I think Stefan preferred it, actually, because it was, you know, Stefan didn't really play the, you know, the hot club music, and he didn't want us to play in that style. It was more kind of American style. And Mark had his own way of playing as well, which was perfect with Stefan. So Mark and I just shared the gig then at that point. And yeah, there was a number of really memorable trips that we did. We did Royal Command performance. We went out to Australia and went to India together, and it was a very, very magical time. And I think I must have been on about 20 albums with Stefan, and we made 2 duo albums together as well. And he played a couple of tracks on my group Spirit of Django's album after I'd worked with him, been touring with him. And also I was on, I think, 3 of the albums he made with Yehudi Menuhin. That was really Michael Parkinson instigated that, well, getting Yehudi Menuhin and Stefan on his TV show. And one particularly memorable one was it was arranged, and the orchestra was arranged and conducted by Nelson Riddle. So that was quite, you know, that was really something. I was very nervous about that, because I'd never really learned to read music very well, and but he'd been told, Stefan had told him, he said, my guitar player, he's not really good reader, he's more of an improviser. So he left things very open. And a very interesting thing, I was so nervous about this, because it was a massive orchestra in Abbey Road, you know, the famous studio where the Beatles recorded. Huge orchestra, and he's conducting, I'm sitting there, and something came up. I could see this thing that I was going to have to play, and it was a written solo for 8 bars. So I thought, oh, because, you know, I could read music a little bit, but not a sight reader. Even now, you know, I'm still not a sight reader. So I looked at it. Then it took a break, everyone went for a break, and I stayed in the studio, and I just went over these 8 bars and tried to memorize it. Right, I think I've got it. And when they came back, we did it. When it came to those 8 bars, my mind went blank, completely blank, because I was enjoying the music so much. I was enjoying this orchestra, the sound of it. They came to my 8 bars. Nelson Riddle's only, he points at me, and I had a rough approximation of how the solo went, and I knew what the chords were. So I just made something up, and I played this 8 bars. And I thought, oh, I'm in deep trouble. He's gonna bore me out in front of the orchestra. But I knew he was a very, very sweet guy. He wasn't that kind of savage conductor that we have met before. He was actually really nice. And when we finished, I thought, oh man, he's going to make us play it again, and I'm going to screw up again. And there's all these they're all session players. I'm not a session player, and they're all readers, and they can't. This kid can't read music, and when it stopped, Stefan looked. He said, "Oh, that was nice." And Nelson Riddle went, "Yeah, yeah, that's a take. That's good." I thought, "Oh wow, he must have realised that I didn't play that solo he'd written." And when he was sort of getting the next piece of music, he looked over me, and Nelson Riddle looked over, but it gave me this sort of look. He was, "I liked what you did there." I thought that was fantastic, because he could have showed me up, but he was such a great musician that he realized actually what I played was probably as good as what he'd written. You know, it worked just as well, and it was in context. And I think that's one of the things I used to think when all the older musicians I used to work with when I was younger, and they liked the way I played. They were guitar players better than me. And I've thought about it in more recent years. What is it they liked about the way I played? What was it? Why did they say, yeah, we'll get you on that? And I came to thought, well, you know, I wasn't the best player. I didn't get the best sound, or you know, I was still working on my time, and I was still working on things. What was it? And I figured it out. Because I always had this music in my head, and I'd listened a lot to music, and I understood it. I always knew what was appropriate to play or not to play. So I could, whatever musical situation I was in, I always knew what to do, and you could understate it anyway. It didn't have to be like really flash. Just put something in there that fits and is in keeping with what's going on and is tasteful. And that is why all those older musicians used to book me all the time. They knew, I mean, when I was in Harry Bence's band on the QE2, we used to back cabaret singers, cabaret acts, and I couldn't read music at all. Not a note. And I would, if there was, sometimes it's just chord symbols, but occasionally there would be something written, and I would just turn to the bass player or the piano player and say, how does that go? And they either play it to me or sing it to me. And then, because I was like a sponge, and I can't do it now because I can't remember what I had for breakfast now. But play it for me. Right, I've got it. Okay, that's fine. And I'd have it. And then what I started to do was, because you're playing the same thing every night, 7 nights a week, and I'd start watching over the shoulder of the tenor saxophone player who was in front of me. And when he played something, I'd hear the sound and I'd go, oh, that looks like that. So I learned it the other way around. You know, I heard the sound, and then I looked to see what it looked like on the paper, rather than looking at what was on the paper and then hearing what that sound like. It was completely back to front. So I can read music. I did learn to read music, but I was never in a situation where I had to sight read. And I wish I had, because now I find it harder to retain a lot of tunes and things as I used to. It would be very handy if I really did read music better than I did, and I can actually read it. So it's you're at a bit of a handicap when you can't read and you can't remember. I'm just an improviser.
And you moved to Scotland then 17 years ago, from where you've been running your empire, almost, you know, your teaching business, and also you've been maintaining your international touring career.
I moved. I came to Scotland in 1974.
Oh, 74.
In 19. Yeah, I came to Scotland in 1974, but then I was working a lot in London. But then I bought a house in Scotland, my first house in Scotland, in just after I started working with Stefan in 1979 and 1980, because by that time I didn't need to be in a particular city or anything. I lived on the West Coast in a little village, and I just used to go away and do my tours. So although I've lived just about all of my adult life in Scotland, I haven't actually worked here that much. You know, I've played at a lot of the festivals. I played many of the Glasgow jazz festivals. I played at the very first one, and the first director was Ken Matheson, the drummer, and I did one of my, I think possibly even my very first gig in Scotland with Ken at the Bull's Head not the Bull's Head, the Black Bull at Mulgai. And so I was involved a little bit in things. I used to go and play some things at the Musicians Society and play any jazz festivals that came up. I would quite often do those. And the only time I really played in around Scotland, and still do, is when it's part of a UK-wide tour. So my agent in England will book a UK tour, and always make sure that there are Scottish dates in there as well. Yeah, so yeah, it's so really from very early on, from when I started working with Stefan. At that point, apart from working with Stefan, I wasn't I wasn't a gigging musician anymore. From from the late 70s, I didn't go out and do gigs, and I only played jazz. I didn't go and do the function gigs at the weekend anymore. I've done plenty of those. I've played at many bar mitzvahs and and weddings and all kinds of functions. But when that happened, so late 70s, then it was just purely playing jazz.
Beautiful. I noticed on Facebook, I think that you've done a couple of things during lockdown with Laura McDonald and with Steve Hamilton.
Yes.
All of which was really beautiful. So I mean, although you're saying you haven't worked much in Scotland, you obviously know people like Laura and Steve and.
Well, I knew Steve's father, Laurie. He was a wonderful guitar player. And I knew Laura's dad as well, singer. So because I lived in Ayr for many years, which is where Laura's from. So I remember when she was when she was very young, and Steve Hamilton and I, we've collaborated in here in my studio at home, and we've written quite a lot of music together, and it's kind of an ongoing thing that we do. So yeah, when this came about, I thought we could do some virtual things, because something that happened 10 years ago, I was contacted. I did a gig in Italy with Jimmy Bruno, great guitar player from Philadelphia. We played a lot together in the States, and he started telling me about his online guitar school. Now this is going back, where are we now? This is going back to where are we? 2000, about 2008, 2009, when he was telling me about this, when he started doing it. So he said, I've got this. It's a guy, a company called Artist Works, a guy called David Butler, who was one of the early guys at AOL, and at the age of 45, he retired. He made his fortune, but he's really into guitar. And he said, and he loves your playing. He said, he said, I've got a guitar. He set up a guitar school for me, interactive. I'd never heard of anything like that. I mean, I could just about send an email, and that was about it. And he said he would love you to start a school. And I said, well, a couple of things. I said, I don't really understand. I can just about send and receive an email. Apart from that, I'm not savvy with computers. So that's a problem. The other thing is, I've never taught before. I've never given a guitar lesson, and I've never been to one. I've never had a guitar lesson. I don't even know what you do. How do you do it? He said, well, you have to work out some kind of idea. So I went to see David when I was in California, and I went to see them up in Napa. Just drove up to the house and spent a couple of days with him, got talking about it. And he started saying, I said, well, what do I have to do? He said, well, you have to have a method. I said, well, I'll have to figure out what I do then, because up to this point, I'd never thought about it. So I actually had to then sit down and say, what is it I do? Because you can't just say, well, do this and play that. You've got to have a method. There's got to be something. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. I said, I'll tell you honestly, I don't know whether I'm up to it, but I'd like to give it a try. And so it's okay. So I went there and spent a week in Napa. No, yeah, spent 2 weeks in Napa, I think, working on things, then going in the studio and then filming all the initial lessons. And then I came back to Scotland, and about a month later, I realized at that time I was living. My wife and I had a house in France, so we were living more in our house in France. So I realized that what I needed to do was just be in one place, not going from two houses, and have somewhere where I could have a studio. as well. So we sold the house in France, got a place here, and I set up a room that I could use as a studio. Not this one, actually, not. It was a different house to this, and I waited for all the equipment to arrive. And then one day UPS turned up with all these boxes, and opened them up. There was a laptop, there was microphones, there were lights. There was another, I can't remember what it was called now, another audio interface type of thing to use, all these things. And I don't know what, I haven't a clue. Yeah, so I rang up a guitar player I know, Adam Bully, who's a wonderful guitar player, mandolin player from Scotland. And he didn't live that far from me at that time. And he's a young guy. And I said, Adam, you understand computers. I told him what it was. I said, come round the house. And he came over and I said, look at these boxes. Could you show me what to do? So he got it all out and he set everything up for me. And we spent a couple of days doing that. And he said, all you got to do is this, and they got the programs on the laptop. And I said, that's beyond me. I can't figure that out. I said, look, I tell you what, I only need to do these once a week because I don't have that many students at the moment. Would you come over and work it all for me? And then so he did that for about 6 months. He kind of Adam educated me on using the computer and all of that thing. And to this day, even though I'm doing it all the time, I'm not very good, but I do have someone that can help me. And yeah, so that happened. Then it really started to take off. But I was always on the road so much, and I had to do a lot of my video. What happens with it is that my students, not all of them, but if they want to send me a video, they just send a video onto the site, which I see, I look at it, I review it, and I film a response. Then their video and my video go up together on the site for everyone to see. So everyone shares with that. So they become little masterclasses. So over the years, I've filmed some of these in bathrooms, in Holiday Inns, in the Midwest, and out in China, and goodness knows where. But at the moment, I'm stationary, so it's quite nice just doing it here. But yeah, so anyway, so I got into it, and I thought, I don't know whether I'm any good at this. But then after a while, I started listening to the guitar players that had we'd done maybe 3 or 4 video exchanges. And I listened, I thought, they're playing so much better. And they would tell me they're playing so much better, and that everyone's telling them they're playing so much better, and that they're enjoying it more. And it's opened up a whole new thing, that they were stagnant. They didn't know where to go next. They were just up a brick wall. So I thought, I don't really know what I'm doing exactly, but whatever it is, it seems to be right. So along the way, I then started to work out a very, very simple method. It goes back to my dad saying to me, all you do is make up your own tune, and just kept everything really simple. I get everyone, all my students, they get, because guitar players particularly, because most of them are not jazz players. Most of them are fingerstyle guitar players, or some rock players that come in and want to learn aspects of what I do. And some of the jazz players, they've been to schools. A lot of them are really fantastic players, and they get kind of bogged down with the theory of it. And then they come to me, and I just say, look, is it a major or is it a minor? Yeah. Left hand of a piano, the tenths. Just think of it like that. Simplify everything. Just have a little structure. Then start adding all the other things. And then I have a little thing called 7 steps, which I do for. If you know the melody and you know the chords to a tune, then using this method, very, very quickly, you can come up with a really good arrangement that goes beyond just a chord melody. Chord melody is actually step 3, but then we can take it up to step 7 with getting all those things like I was showing you that Ike showed me. So yeah, so then suddenly I found myself as a guitar teacher, and pretty successful at it. I couldn't believe how many students I had, and I think 60 countries at one point. And so I thought, well, I won't go out on the road as much, but that didn't work out. Because the things that I want to do, and not just the solo things. I mean, Ulf Vakanius and I, we great Swedish jazz guitar player, played with Oscar Peterson for 10 years. We have a guitar duo. We play mostly in Asia together, and lots of things that I just want to do. So I still found myself out on the road, but not really, not as much. And it was just a really nice thing to do. And for the first time in my life, have a kind of financial stability as well. And then through this, in more recent years, I was contacted by a publishing company called Fundamental Changes. The guy that started it, Joseph Alexander's a guitar player, jazz guitar player, and his partner in that is actually a student of mine, an ex-student of mine. So they contacted me. They've been really successful at instruction books, guitar books. So they asked me to write a book, which I did, and went to #1 at Amazon straight away, and then write another one. So I've been writing 3 a year, and my latest one is Christmas songs, actually. But really, it's a lot of things that I teaching guitar players how to create solos, teaching how to improvise, demystifying everything, keeping it really simple. So I've done I've done about 6 or 7 books. So that's something that keeps me busy here. I've got a great team because they help me, because they've been through. Joseph has a degree in music, and he studied jazz. Tim is also a really good player, and has also taken lots of lessons for people. So I can actually say to him, so see, when you went to so and so for lessons, what did they teach you? What did you want to know, and what was helpful to them? So they would come here, and I sit down and play, and I'd say, well, I'm thinking of this, and they'd say, yeah, that's because I have total trust in them. I say, I've got this idea, and I tell them the idea, and I play them some ideas, and they'll go, yeah, that's good. That'll work. The only thing is, you'll also need to do this to make it make sense. So, all right, take that on board. I don't get pressure to say, well, no, this is my baby, I want it like this. I say, okay, yeah, you guys know what you're doing. I'll do that. What if I do this? And they'll say, no, that won't work. Okay, right, forget it, because I know they know what they're doing. So it's great working with them. And then I have a wonderful transcriber, great guitar player, Levi Clay, who it's very funny. There must be some big exodus north, because Joseph has moved from the Manchester area to Edinburgh now, and Levi now lives in Lanarkshire. So they're all here. So, but I know I can record something here, film myself, get it to Levi, and sometime half an hour later, he'll get it back to me. He's transcribed perfectly what I've written. There's no point in me learning how to do that when he's there, and share the love, as they say, share it around. So it gives him some work too.
Well, thanks so much, Martin, for giving so generously of your time. And
I hope I haven't gone on too much. I can
not at all.
Go on a little bit. And you didn't interrupt me at any point, which you should have done.
Absolutely not. I was hooked throughout. It's your fault, by the way, that I play guitar, because I came to see you playing with Stefan Grappelli at the Usher Hall back in early 80s or mid 80s.
Oh, really? How about that?
So I blame you entirely for a life misspent on jazz guitar.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. You could have got a proper job.
I know. Well, I have one of those also, thankfully. But I thought it might be nice if you play us out with a little something. If
yeah. Now, bearing in mind, where are we now? This is October 15, 2020.
Yeah.
I did my last gig in March in France in March, on March the 10th, I think it was. So I haven't really played, apart from just doing little things in here. What is that? 7-8 months or something, isn't it? So I'll see what I can do.